How long do you want me to speak? Because I can go as long as we want, or I can shorten it
Yeah.
up.
Okay, you got 30 minutes. And
Okay.
then maybe like you can leave 10 minutes for question.
Yeah, I'll definitely, I'm not going to take up much because I feel like there's always lots of questions. So I'll probably do between 10 and 12 minutes or so. So this is one of my favorite pictures, and of course, you know now that as a mother, my take on digital accessibility is that it should be as simple as having a child work the computer. Okay, so it doesn't have to be super complicated, but of course, whenever somebody says accessibility, my take on it is that everybody always fears this space. But essentially, the ease of use when it comes to accessibility should be something that is so intuitive that even a child can use it. Um, as I said earlier, I'm the co-founder and CEO of SenseIT. A few other things about me is that I am passionate about social impact. So as a social entrepreneur, I really like to solve big problems that the world has that impact people in a positive manner. I think out of the box. So generally, when someone asks me a question, I usually answer it in a way that's very, very different from the mainstream because I think that we can find solutions when we're not thinking just in in one direction. I'm a runner, so despite having the five kids and busy life, which is what I like to have, I run. I've done a half marathon twice. And I tend to run as much as I can on a daily basis. So it could be between 3 and 10 kilometers. And you'll likely hear somebody calling me Ima, which is Hebrew for mom on a regular basis. And I go by the pronouns she and her. I co-founded SenseIT together with my husband, actually, who's a web accessibility specialist, a digital accessibility specialist back in 2018. And one of the things that I like to do before I start speaking about shifting left and a little bit more technical, and I'm not technical myself, so we're not going to get into very much detail technical wise, but I can answer questions. Um, but I really like to open up with my approach to digital accessibility because it seems to be slightly different in the last few years than what I find most people think about digital accessibility. We will go over how good is good enough because I always think that there needs to be some sort of a boundary line between not doing it at all and doing everything that you can. But there's got to be something that's good enough. Um, that satisfies the need for people's user experience when it comes to accessibility and people with disabilities. But we don't have to get to a point where we say 100% because at the end of the day, there's no such thing when it comes to accessibility, from my take. And I'd love to hear the other panelists also when it comes to this. And then, of course, we can discuss automated testing tools without going into much detail because I'm not here to market. I'm here to just advocate for what I believe in, which is get your accessibility going as early as possible. So we'll begin with my approach and what I believe in. Excuse me a second. In this picture, I'm going to show you 3 slides. And I like to call this picture equality. Because back in the day when we wanted people to, when we wanted to offer solutions, and specifically for accessibility, we wanted to make sure that everybody is equal, meaning we want to give everybody the same solution. So if these 3 people are watching, we'll call them, an adult and 2 kids just because of the heights, but they're watching a baseball game here and there's a fence. So in order for them to be able to watch the baseball game, we're offering them the same type of solution, a booster box to be able to see the game. But we can see that number 3 can't actually see the game. So equality doesn't actually work in this case. So we move on to what we like to call, hold on if it's going to work. Sometimes the slides don't pass. There we go. Nope. So we move on to what we like to call equity, which is to offer a solution that's best suited for the person that needs it in order for that person to be able to see the game. So it's almost like to lend a hand to the person and offer the solution that they can see without necessarily, quote unquote, disrupting the view of the person that doesn't need it. So equity works really well because then we can say, okay, if you need something, we'll offer it for you. Well, this is one of the approaches of accessibility in the last, I don't know, 20 or somewhat years. And some people are still I'll say stuck on this view or this perception. And I say stuck, and I don't mean it very negatively, but I believe that there's a different and a better way to offer solutions, and that's to remove the systematic barriers. So if we only remove the fence, a gate or the fence that you can't see, and we put a fence where you can see, then everyone can view the game in their own way, but we don't need to offer specific solutions. And I believe that this is what digital accessibility is all about. In other words, if we're able to offer solutions from the very beginning, from the get-go, that don't block a view for anybody, then this is pure and holistic accessibility as I'd like to see the digital world. This, of course, is in the physical world. And, fun fact here or a little anecdote, I once spoke to another founder in the digital accessibility space, and we had a conversation around these 3 slides. And one of the things that he was very keen on is that if we're removing a systematic barrier per se, but he didn't say it in that way. He said if we're putting a fence up, then we're disturbing the way that the person that doesn't need a solution sees the game. In other words, now that a person sees through a fence, they can't see without a fence anymore. So, I mean, there's something to say about that, but I don't believe that, because you're not really disturbing anybody. You're just offering, in my opinion, a better solution for everyone without having to now bring in something special per se for those that can't or that have trouble seeing. If anyone has any opinion on this, it would be really great for you to put in the comments in Slido, or you can ask me later on. It's something that I'm very interested to hear what and how others view this. With that being said, what is accessibility, usability, and in the digital world? So, I speak a lot of times to various teams and various aspects of the development cycle. So we have our designers we kind of see eye to eye, because when we define accessibility, we say it's usability for people with disabilities. So if you can only view accessibility as user experience for someone who needs additional assistance, then we're actually in the design world of UX. And how can we make the user experience for a person with disability great, just like we're trying to aim for people without disabilities. So accessibility is usability for people with disabilities. It's possible to do it as early as your design stage, but then of course you need to support that design with your development, and then your testing, and then your your user experience with actual users, and make sure that that's okay, and then bring it back into the cycle and constantly maintain that accessibility. So again, the point here is that accessibility is usability for people with disabilities. And just a moment, slide stuck. Okay. Usability defined, I don't have to necessarily define it for everyone here, but at the end of the day, when we're taking the definition of usability and then we're implementing it into the world of accessibility, and we're claiming that usability is the extent to which a product can be used by specified users, we can't forego that there are users with disabilities as well. In other words, we're not saying specified users that can only use a mouse or can see, hear, speak, and use their motor skills. We're saying that usability has to be for specified users for a specified context of use. And then we go into accessibility. For whatever reason, my slides keep getting stuck. So let's see if I come out of slideshow mode. Otherwise, we're going to be here forever. Excuse me for 1 second. Let's end the show. Okay, I think this is going to work better. Is that okay that everyone can see this? Okay. So like I said before, if we're talking about specified users, we're including the people with disabilities, and there's a range of disabilities. So we can't just say that we're aiming for people who are blind, because then we're excluding a whole bunch of people within the I call it spectrum, although it's not really the word to use when we're discussing disabilities, but there's a slew of disabilities that we need to address. And people tend to look at blind users because it's generally the most extreme type of disability that needs to be addressed, primarily because somebody who's blind uses only the keyboard and uses assistive technology to browse. So it's a good place to start, but it's not the only type of disability that we address in digital accessibility. Moving on. When we address accessibility, there's the Bible for how we determine what is and isn't accessible, and that's the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Great. Many may have heard of this, many may reference these guidelines, and I actually put a really, really great, I should make a little bit bigger and then I'll come out. This is a really great map of the WCAG 2.1. If anybody wants to, you can go into the Intopia website. This is not my own. This is something that I show because it really breaks down the way that the WCAG is written, in that it, oh, there we go, you see. In that it breaks down the success criteria into 4 different principles: perceivable, operable, robust, and understandable. And this is really the guiding light for when it comes to how and what you should be testing for digital accessibility. With that being said, okay, just to break it down very, very, very simply and high level, you have 4 principles broken down into 3 different conformance levels. So if anyone tells you, oh, my client needs digital, accessibility, AAA, generally the highest form of digital accessibility that really, in the US at least, only federal government and federally funded organizations are looking at. But our mainstream is generally this AA conformance, which includes A and AA itself. These conformance levels are split into 78 success criteria. Great. I'm saying this because it really gives an idea of how the map or the whole guideline is broken down. But what's important to say, and that's how I approach accessibility, is that this is only our guiding light. This is not the be all and end all. You really can't take a success criteria and understand it to the fullest or implement it without interpreting what the meaning is. And really the meaning of the WCAG, and we also have the design patterns, the W3C wrote the WCAG, and W3C also provides design patterns for accessibility, which outline the expected user behavior. And what we're trying to do essentially is not go by a checklist or mark the box, which a lot of companies and people tend to do because we really don't necessarily understand the depth of accessibility. But the point here is to really understand what is the expected outcome or the expected behavior of a user, just like you do for UX, and then determine what you need to do in order to make sure that that expected outcome is implemented in your element or in your design pattern. I'm not stopping for questions, right? We're going to do that at the end. Okay. So now if I move on to how good is good enough, with understanding that there's the WCAG guidelines, we have a guiding light, and you're not going to really understand how to implement every one of those success criteria because they're not really a list of do this, do this, do this, do this. Rather, this needs to be done in such a way. Well, such a way could be tested in a few different ways, and you may have to test, one specific success criteria in 20 different ways for a specific element. So that's when it becomes a little bit more convoluted. So we came up with a way to determine your accessibility level per se, okay? Not level in terms of AAA, but in terms of where you stand on the accessibility scale and how you can implement that with your team, your developers, your product managers, your designers, just so that you have some sort of a measurement without really saying, okay, we're 98%, we're 70%. We like to call it the good enough scale. And we take we like to look at it from user journeys, okay? We being my team. So we'll take the impact level and the severity level, and whether or not this user journey is critical or not in the process of in the processes or in your product. And we'll say, okay, if it's a high severity level and it's going to impact the users on a critical user journey, you've got to take care of every aspect of the accessibility. In other words, if you have issues or errors, you've got to take care of everything. If it's not a critical user journey, then we like to say, okay, take care of everything that's going to be the highest severity level. Things that are a red line, a no, and you can't, you have to make sure that there's no error that's, the red alerts that we call. But there are other things that could be an issue for accessibility, but it doesn't affect the user, this is the user impact. It doesn't affect the user experience where there's a complete barrier. Rather, it's not a very nice experience for a user, or there's a better way to do so. In that case, we like to tell our customers, here, you don't have to address it immediately because it's probably going to cause a slowdown in your development, but this should be addressed later. And then there are things that we say, it's not critical, it's not a high user impact, it's really on the bottom of the priority list. It's nice to have if you can do so. So that's how we like to measure it. Of course, this is very high level, but it's more in detail. Here I offer a table, and I'm happy to share it with anybody who wants to have it. And just as an example, if I we speak about shift left, but I'm not actually going to get into it very deeply. Just as one example for keyboard functionality. So this is one of the functionalities that we like to address almost immediately because it's the basis of the way that you're going to further develop your product and constantly leaning back on whether or not it's functional with your keyboard. So keyboard functionality is not only the use of your keyboard, but it's the use of your keyboard together with any assistive technology that's being used. And this is when we test, we like to go back to the extreme case, which is a blind user. In other words, somebody who doesn't use a mouse and uses a screen reader. So the screen reader is compatible with the keyboard, and therefore everything needs to work in such a way where screen reader is able to capture the elements or the flow itself and the expected outcome, and tell the user how to use it with the keyboard. If the two aren't compatible in an element, it's just not going to work, and the user experience is going to be a failure. I'm going to take another minute, and here we go again. I'm stuck, so we'll come out of slideshow mode. Just a moment. Okay. So just as an example for keyboard functionality, here we have a menu item. In order for us to determine if this menu is actually accessible, we want to test it with our keyboard and make sure that our user can locate the menu, in this case, the sign-in element on top of that top bar. And then we can actually navigate within this menu. So it's not enough that we've opened it. It's not enough that we can see what's there, but we want to navigate to every one of these elements within the menu and to be able to go through the flow. So navigating through it may mean that we want to go down to my purchases. We need to be able to go into that purchase, and we need to be able to also navigate within the my purchases. So some people will, I've had customers that will make sure that their top menu is accessible. You can open it, but then you can't navigate within the menu. You've done nothing. And that's unfortunate, because if you've taken the time to actually make sure that things are keyboard friendly and you can get to them, you want to make sure that you can actually complete the process. And in this case, I like to reference, like I said before, the design patterns. A lot of people know of ARIA labels, but if you're just sticking ARIA labels everywhere, you're actually ruining your user experience when it comes to accessibility. So you really need to go deep down into the design patterns to understand that, okay, this is what we call a menu or a menu bar, and there's menu buttons, and there are certain guidelines and expected behaviors for accessibility that you can actually look there. Great reference. I recommend anyone and everyone to go ahead and to look at that, because it really gives a nice, a further guiding light to how you should design and develop your product. And to really close my my presentation here is the question, can we shift left for accessibility? You absolutely can shift left for accessibility. It doesn't have to be a manual process. There are ways that we can go ahead and we can implement automated tools and techniques to be able to test for accessibility earlier and further down the line. I mentioned earlier that what we're doing at SenseIT is developing a simulator to simulate the behavior of users with disabilities, because it's, like I said before, it's not just one type, one form. And what we understood, and this is probably why I'm here and why we speak in the testing world, I understood that there's a gap between the need for accessibility and the tools and platforms available specifically for the world of testing. And that's primarily because what we have available today is code scanners. But in order for us to really determine accessibility, like I said earlier, is that we want to know the user behavior. And in order to do that, we need to test from the UI. So our thesis was, you can test automatically, you can test from the UI, we just need to find a way to do so. And we found a way to do so by simulating it. So the goal is to shift left as much as possible for accessibility, make accessibility something that's, part of your development cycle and not that stepbrother of testing. And that's our goal at SenseIT, and it's what my thesis is all about. I really, truly believe that you can. And to finalize what I've said, accessibility is usability for people with disabilities. So it can be done right, and it needs to be done. And I really thank you for your time, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much. So we have a question. What is the story getting involved in A11Y? I don't know if I call it correct.
Accessibility. A11Y is accessibility, just shortened because accessibility has 11 letters.
Okay.
So what is this story? So what is the question? What is the story in getting involved?
Yes.
I'm not really sure that I understand the question.
I think why you care.
Oh, why did I?
I think I
Oh,
understand. Like,
oh, of course.
I would
Okay.
like
Yes, it's a good question because a lot of times I open up with it. So like I said earlier, my husband is a specialist. He's an expert in digital accessibility. He worked in physical accessibility and then moved on to the digital world. Back in 2013 or back in 2012, he started talking about it. And in 2014, he had an idea for how to create a tool and what can be done in this space. And he thought it was really great that in the digital world, you can actually scale and you can find solutions and you can fix things much better than in the physical world. And I heard that for many years. And then in 2018 or 17, I can't remember the date, a very close friend of the family had a very bad accident, and he's now quadriplegic, a PhD candidate, and he's living his life. He was 21 at the time, one of my sister's really close friends. And that's when all my worlds just came together. I started seeing the digital world in a completely different place. And I always have him in front of my eyes. Not because I'm doing it necessarily for him, but because I understand and I have this empathy for people in general, knowing that a person is a person is a person. It doesn't matter what you're doing and how you're doing or how you're living life, but you need to be able to live like everyone else, and we have the ability to do so. So I'm really, really passionate about accessibility when it comes to finding the solutions. It's not just to check the box. It's not just a business, but it is a good business. And it's not just social impact where it's, nonprofit and everything is free. This is something that we need to address. We need to put it on the top of our priority list when it comes to development, and we need to find the right solutions. So thank you for the question.
Thank you. The next one, the only way to create accessibility product is to actually include people with disability into the process, and those people should be the one to test. What do you think?
I think it's very true that we need to include people, just like we include people in regular usability testing. And I hate to call it regular, but we'll call it non-accessibility testing. What I do believe is that we need to open our mind and think out of the box. And how can we do so without having to depend only on manual testers or people? So can we do a mix of both? Is there a way in the process that we can include the users with disabilities in order to determine accessibility issues, errors, barriers, or give it a go, but also to be able to streamline the process so that we're not blocking the development cycle. So I know that there's also extremities when it comes to how we test for accessibility, and it has to be done in one specific way. I like to believe that there's a mix of ways, and I wouldn't forego requiring user testing at some point down the line, but it needs to be balanced out also with the processes that happen within a company.
Okay. I have a personal question. So you start up in Israel, right? Am I correct?
Yep.
And Israel is like a well known about like startup nation. How
Yep.
does your like government support? Like, does it really helpful?
Um, So there are a lot of guidelines. I mean, we started out doing work with government offices, with the ministries. So there is a lot of support. I mean, in general in tech, there's a lot of support, and there is a lot of support for accessibility and for digital accessibility. I always say it's not enough. I think that we can always do more. But I also, I walk the walk. I'm also part of committees, and I work together with the large NGOs in Israel and the nonprofits in order to make sure that we continue and we further the accessibility. So there's definitely support for it, and I always think that we can do more.
Wow. Okay, there's another two question I didn't see. Okay. To what extent are accessibility to standard practiced company and organization in Japan? To extend our accessibility standards practiced by companies, organization in Japan? But you don't know about Japan, right?
Well,
Do you know?
I don't know specifics. I can tell you that I have partners that are located in Japan, because there's a lot of advance in accessibility in the last few years. It's really coming out. And if I look at different countries, Japan is coming out and leading the way for accessibility, digital accessibility, when it comes to the Asian countries that I've had contact with, but I don't have specifics on it because I'm more focused on North America.
Okay, thanks. And another question, and a lot of initiative have business metrics to measure them with. What can people use to measure the success of the A11Y initiatives?
It,
Initiative.
yeah, I mean, the measuring the success. So I'm happy to share the way that we do it and give kind of an idea. I have a whole explanation of how to do it. There are tools that measure, but it has to do with scanning the code, and then they give some sort of a number. I believe that the true measurement is going to be how usable the product actually is, and then to determine whether or not, like I said before, taking the critical user journeys, the user journeys that are critical in a product need to be fully accessible against the various WCAG successes. So there's not an easy way to come out and say, go ahead and measure it this way. I can say that the WCAG is coming out with new guidelines sometime soon. That's going to be an easier way to measure whether or not you're abiding by the guidelines and the usability of people with disabilities. So right now I can't give just a very magical answer, but maybe my colleagues on the panel can.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, I think there exist two Slido. I think this is it. Okay, and can I ask one more question from
Of
me?
course.
So,
Absolutely.
yeah, I'm so curious about your country, and this is a ladies in tech. So, how is the environment, like a gender gap in tech, like industry in Israel? Is there any gender gap?
Absolutely. The gender gap worldwide is high up there. I, of course, am very involved in women in tech. So, for my eyes, I see that there's a lot of women, but ultimately the numbers are almost the same. I think we're at like 3 or 5%. I think our numbers increased in the last year and a half or so in terms of female founders and female CEOs. I think we were at 3%, and it's increased, but it's very it's unfortunate, but we're very much like the rest of the world where women CEOs are, less than, and for every 10 men, you have about 1 or 2 women. So it's really not that much. I mean, in a group, because the numbers show otherwise, but it exists. And I feel like one of my tasks is to just put myself out there all the time and say, okay, despite a gap that's written in the books, I don't believe that there's a need for a gap. And like I said earlier, I'm a mother, and you'll have to deal with the fact that I pick up my kids from school and I can talk to you maybe in an hour or with noisy background. So,
Wow. Wow, you are like a superwoman.
thank you.
Okay, so let's see if there's any other question. Okay, thank you so much. I don't know if I hope I don't see any question right here. Okay,
Available
thank
on
you.
LinkedIn, anyone who wants to ask. Thank you so much for your time, Ms. Sue. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Okay, then, oh, sorry. Somebody sent me. Oh, okay. Okay.